Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. Bruchim Habayim. Welcome. Welcome to friends from near and far, from different chapters of our congregation's life, past, present, and, God willing, future. By the way, if you happen to finish your meal, which you do not have to rush, feel free to come closer, scoot a chair closer if you'd like. I am Rabbi Marcy Bellows, very proud and honored to serve as the spiritual leader here in the new century of Congregation Beth Shalom, Rodfe Zedek. And it is a pleasure to have the opportunity to guide us this morning through a look at our first century, with the help of a few key members of our congregation's journey, of our story, especially Ellen Nodelman, the author of our book, just being released today. And I know that many of you will be anxious to have her sign your book, which she is graciously willing to do. We will be having signing following our program this morning. Ellen will be sitting at a table over here by Wendy, and so if you'd like to bring your copies of the book, I'm sure she would love to inscribe them for you. Also, books will continue to be on sale during the program, as well as hopefully you had a chance to see some of our CBSRZ swag over here to my right, your left, and so feel free to bring some more CBSRZ home with you today. And also, please don't worry about getting up to, get some more food or use the restroom. It's part of being our mishpacha. Take care of yourself while you're here. It's all right. And finally, I do want to introduce our congregation's president, Maxine Klein, who is sitting right there. Thank you to Maxine for all of her support. I know she's been a part of the crew who's been working very hard on bringing this book to all of us, and really to the shoreline, to all of Connecticut, to the Jewish American experience. So thank you, everyone. You'll hear a lot more about the other key members of that crew. We are going to be, this morning, hearing some specific stories from Ellen Friedman, John Joslow, and Michael Price, all of whom were instrumental in their involvement with our congregation at different points in its history. In America, it is not that common to have congregations that can place our roots as far back as 100 years or more. And so to be a part of that kind of community, especially the unique experience of being chicken farmers, and I hope you had a chance to say hi to our adorable chickens on your way in. And through this incredible cultural, religious, spiritual, and social center that we are today. So I would like to invite up our speakers, if they are ready, to join me at the table. Each has presented a few memories and thoughts about their involvement, both in our Moodus home base, our Chester and Deep River home base, and then bringing those two families together into the future that became CBSRZ. Following their presentations and a little bit of the conversation that we're going to have together, we have an opportunity, as you saw in your program, Memories with Special Guests. There are a few people who I'm going to start with from our crowd, but if you have an anecdote or a story that you'd like to briefly share with us about your time with our congregation, we would sure love to hear it. Finally, we are live streaming our event this morning on YouTube so that friends at home who are unable to make it today are able to join us, as well as if you'd like to go back and hear anything again, it'll be available on YouTube on our CBSRZ channel, which you're always invited to visit/subscribe to. So, friends, please join me in welcoming Ellen Friedman, John Joslow, and Michael Price to speak with us this morning. Would you like to take the mic out?
I think I'd like Michael.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go on. Okay.
I first came to this community in 1963, and there were many. I do believe that the line in the Siddur that says immortality is part of our faith, and immortality exists in people's cherished memories. And so you'll forgive me if I mention a few names, because they are the cherished memories that have made this synagogue my home for so many years. There were the Greenbergs, there was Brightman, there was Waldinger, there was Zach, Harry Zach, who had the most fantastic collection of Haggadot. It now resides at Yeshiva University, and who ran a vegetable and seed store in Deep River. But there are three families, and there was the Birnbaums. Adele and Abe. Abe Birnbaum was a state meat inspector, and every year our big fundraiser, no, second big fundraiser, John will talk about the other one, was a corned beef dinner in the basement of our synagogue on Union Street. We didn't have enough power, we ran cords to all the neighbors' houses. But when I first came here, there were three families whose wives are still with us today, who really were the heart of the synagogue. There was Alan Pressman, who is our pharmacist in Deep River. Where Adam's Supermarket was a big pharmacy run by Alan. And if you wanted to connect Jewishly, you went to the pharmacy counter. And there was Alan, and there was Arlene. And Arlene, thank God, is with us here today. Hi, Arlene. There was Harold Samuels, the dentist, whose office was across the parking lot from Alan's pharmacy. Harold and Rita lived on Union Street, on Elm Street, and they were the hosts of so many of the rabbis and students who came through to daven with us. They also stayed with the Prestons up on the road just above Deep River. And the third member of that team was Lowell Clapholz, whose children are here today. Lowell was the Talmud Chacham. He was the soul of this congregation. These three families, every Friday night, gathered us together at Union Street. We had itinerant students from Yukon who came and davened for us. We reached out to Rabbanim across the country to come for the Yom Tovim, for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, and we leaned on neighboring synagogues for life cycle events, burials, brits, counseling. It was a warm and embracing congregation at that time. It was the beginning of what we have here today, a welcoming for all people. It was you could be sure that wherever you were, these three families and the extended families knew where you were and knew what you needed. And we grew, and I think John will take up some of the growth of the synagogue, but we never grew out of being a warm, friendly, and Hamish congregation. And we had a relationship with Rodfe Zedek in Moodus. They were our predecessor congregation. We were a break-off of them. And we leaned on Rabbi Bernstein over and over and over again because he had given up his dreams of being a rabbi in a bigger congregation to take care of our congregation, our Jewish life here in the lower Middlesex County. There was a time, though, where we ended up with a stronger Beth Shalom and a weaker Rodfe Zedek. And Rabbi Bernstein could no longer serve the congregation. how wonderful it was that we began to talk about a merger. We talked, and we talked, and we talked for 8 years. We held meetings, most of them in Ellen Friedman's family's living room on Route 82 in East Haddam. And Murray and Adele Miller kept saying, we'll get there, we'll get there. Well, we had to wait for some entrenched interests, both in our congregation and in Rodfe Zedek, to leave us. And we remember them. We remember them with great dedication to our congregations, but they did not see us together. Our congregation had grown to the point where Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services were no longer viable in our Union Street synagogue. So I had the great opportunity to offer a building for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we moved services to the Chester Theater. God forbid some of my board members of ancient times of Goodspeed who talked about those people on North Moodus Road who now had a live functioning synagogue in their theater. We did this for a number of years, and we invited the Moodus congregation to join us because they didn't have a rabbi. But we still were not achieving the marriage. So one year I said, the synagogue cannot use the Chester Theater. And John Sandberg and I said, well, there's only one place to go. It's to go to Rodfe Zedek up in Moodus. And so we did. And we did, I think, 2 years, John, there. We had 2 years at Rodfe Zedek, and lo and behold, our people felt comfortable with Rodfe Zedek, and Rodfe Zedek said, we feel comfortable with you. And it was shortly thereafter that under a chuppah at Union Street, Doug Sagal pronounced us one and all. We enjoyed our times together. We had our wonderful spiritual leaders. First, they came from the conservative movement. Then we had them come from, they were rabbis on the staff of the Union for Reform Judaism, who came and took care of us on the holidays. They were staff rabbis in New York, and they needed high holy day pulpits, and they came here. And then we had a wonderful student rabbi by the name of Marcia Plum. And Marcia was living with us for a while, and then she moved to the parsonage at the Baptist Church in Essex with Erica. What? Erica Wimber. And John, what did Marcia say at a board meeting once?
When Marcia was leaving, you have to pardon my language, she said to the board when we were talking about getting a full-time rabbi, either shit or get off the pot. You gotta hire a full-time rabbi or you'll never amount to anything.
That's not how she said it. She said it with the Texas accent.
Wait, either shit or get off the pot, y'all.
Well, we all had gone to Marcia's ordination at Temple Emmanuel in New York, and then brought her back here as a quasi full-time, quasi-part-time rabbi until she went on elsewhere. And the next thing we knew, Joanne and who went with you to HUC? Amy Bloom. Amy Bloom and Joanne went down to HUC to hire our first rabbi full-time, which was Doug Sagal. And they came back, and he said, I'm fresh out of rabbi school, and here I am in Chester, Connecticut. It was kind of a wonderful experience and 10 wonderful years, and we flourished at that time with a school that kept growing and growing, and we had a wonderful, wonderful growth spurt at that time. So I want to thank all of you in this room, because for me, your being here in carrying on this congregation is so important. You make this community in 2017. You keep it alive, and you keep those who came before us alive in our memories, and the work that they did, the spade work that they did, to make this congregation what it is today and what you have made it today is just ever so important. Thank you.
Well, I'm John Doslow, and I can't add to Michael's comments because what he just took you through were many, many years of how we got to be where we are today. But I will just comment on a couple of items. But even before doing so, I was wondering, well, what's the criteria for us three up here? There are a few people that have been here many more years than I have. But I think someone had said, I represent just a certain period of about 50 years or so. 61, okay, yeah, all in, sure, and a half. But just for a second, just to give you a feel for what's in this room that you may not know about, I'd just like to see all the presidents and officers from day one, just to stand up for 1 second. Right now. Joanne, John, look at this. Round of applause. Nancy, is that you back there? Can you just wave? Okay. So yeah, I was a bar mitzvah boy, and I'll just share just a couple of quick stories because I think the context is all there. And I'll talk about the bar mitzvah situation, which was an interesting one, and also the corned beef dinner. But I saw Marcy. Where's Marcy? Raise your hand. Yeah, so Marcy's back there. Marcy Clapos, who was someone who was around when I was around. The corned beef dinners were quite something. I'm hoping after this there's an opportunity for people who want to talk about things. But I'll start off with Bill Hahn, because I didn't realize what an economic driver Bill Hahn's was. Bill Hahn's was, if I say it the right way, a resort over in Westbrook, right? Water's Edge. Before it was Water's Edge. And I didn't realize who was ever paying for the religious everything at the synagogue. But at a young age, my job with Alan Birnbaum and two other people, Jay Diamond and one other person, I can't remember his name, we were the bar mitzvah boys. And we went straight through together. There was no one behind us that I can recall, and no one in front of us. There were not a lot of Jews in this area back then. So we were all the same age, and we would do everything together on Sundays. But one of the things was during the holidays, we had our assignments, and I always knew when high holidays was coming, because as we would walk around Union Street during breaks, there were always chestnuts on the ground. And for some reason, when I knew the chestnuts were dropping as a young child, I knew that it must be right around time for high holidays. And surely enough, if you go to the synagogue, you'll see as you walk along Union Street, some chestnuts will be stepping on, and it's my indicator. The bus would show up at high holidays, and it's referred to, it was captured really nicely, but I've never seen mink stoles and things like that in Chester. It just, the people didn't walk around that way. And you would see the big bus come up and park in front, and everybody would just slowly descend. The whole place would blow up with energy, talk, etc., until things settled down. But one of the things that I can remember, the seating was just so intense, there wasn't any place to sit. And one day I was seated, I remember this lady coming by with jewelry and everything. She said, "Excuse me, young man, would you stand up so I can sit down?" I said, yes. But in those days, I think we were kept alive because someone had put envelopes into all the sidduras, and that's probably what kept us going. And very easily, when did they stop coming? Bill Hahn.
When Bill Hahn died. But he used to throw the fundraiser for us too at Bill Hunt.
So he still did stuff. So, I mean, they kept us alive until at some point, you know, everything disintegrated. But that was one thing. The memories from that was that our whole building would just so much come alive. And then, of course, one of the things that Michael said also about that everything got too, the synagogue was growing so much at Deep River that we would have events. George would stand there with 2x4s, right, George?
Yeah.
George would be there with 2x4s underneath in the basement as temporary lolly columns. He put in place 3 or 4 of them because he was so concerned about everybody just kind of going through. And then lastly, Wild dancing, yes, yeah, things were getting a bit out of. We had the klezmer band going, probably around that time, I don't know. It was getting pretty loud. The corned beef dinners, just quickly, what I remember about those, the Birnbaums and the Joslos were kind of tied together growing up. They had 2 girls and a boy. We had 2 girls and a boy, the same ages. It was very convenient. And so every Sunday, I'd be dropped off, or we'd be dropped off back and forth. And as Michael said, Abe Birnbaum was a meat inspector, and he knew about meats. He also had the butcher store in Chester, where at the foot of Maine, what is there now?
Real estate.
Whatever. Design, okay. But it was at one point a meat store. And so he knew a lot about meats, and he was in charge of the kitchen from what I can recall. Alan and I and the other bar mitzvah boys, our job was to help set up, put the pickles out. I can remember all the stuff we had to do. Big pots came from nowhere. The electrical cords were like spaghetti emanating all around the building to people's homes who would take our electricity, from whom we would take electricity because of all the coffee pots. Our fuses were always blowing all the time. But it was exciting. Just in case you're interested, there were 2 seatings. And they were pretty much sold out. We also delivered. There was also some people delivering. And I couldn't believe that, I don't think it was all that economic what they did, because the plates were these big plates, and they would just stuff everything for, I don't know, maybe $1.50. You got enough to feed a family for a week. But those were shipped out. So it was just a neat thing once a year, and that was between that and the Bill Hans, I think that was pretty much it.
No dues.
No dues.
No high holy day tickets.
You just show up with a mink coat, take a check. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Well, I really didn't even plan anything to say today because I didn't even know what you wanted me to talk about. But I've decided that I want to talk about the women of Rodfe Zedek. My parents moved to East Haddam in 1946, before I was even in school. And I'm so happy to see there's a table of my friends from then, and my Hebrew school mates, and Nancy Brand, who was the first bat mitzvah, because until Nancy, girls weren't important enough to be bat mitzvah. We were quite an Orthodox congregation. The old synagogue was split. The men were downstairs, the women and girls were upstairs. And the people, not only the chicken farmers, but the hotels, the heyday of the hotels in Moodus, they were all Jews. I graduated from high school with a class of 51. 15, and all the top students were Jewish, which was phenomenal back in that time. And even today, very phenomenal. So it was a unique place to grow up because you were in the country and yet you felt very Jewish. And socially, you were very Jewish. The women of the congregation were so busy during the summers, working in their hotels. My parents had a restaurant, and yet they were instrumental, again, in raising the money to keep the congregation going. They had a huge raffle each year. And of course, their guests at the hotels were wonderful because they had the audience there to get the money. And they didn't raffle little things off. They raffled maybe stoles. One year, it was a service for 12 of sterling silver. My mother was chairman that year. And the raffle actually was picked after the season was over. And then anything was mailed, usually to New York. Well, there were 5 tickets that were left. And my mother said, no, we're going to sell out completely. So she bought the last 5 tickets, threw them in the hopper, and they used an old bingo hopper, that went around and around and around. Lo and behold, I am the owner of the sterling silver. 61 years later, I still use it. I probably was the youngest girl ever to have her own set of sterling. The women also were very instrumental in a theater group. And they would reluctantly get the men to join. They did Men Who Came to Dinner. They did other plays. That's the one that comes to mind because my mother was the star. And Jack Michaels was her husband. And that was a big money maker. They did that at the school. And of course, they went out and sold the program. And the program made the money again. I don't think we had dues either. Then came a time when Beth Shalom had no Hebrew school teacher. My mother spoke fluent Hebrew, and she felt that this was her time to come over here and help. So she headed the Hebrew school, dragged me along, I was a teenager, to lead the choir. And she also brought Stephanie Sprecher with her, may she rest in peace, to help with the children. And this went on for quite a few years. And Michael, if I remember correctly, you say it took 8 years. But it seems to me like it started 20 years before the 8 years, were the first meetings in my parents' living room, because my first husband was alive at that time and was on the committee. And John, you were there on the committee. My job was to provide coffee and refreshments. So this has really been a long, long time to bring us to this fruitful, wonderful relationship. And if I can just tell one little story, and tell me to shut up if you want. When we were little kids, they would have a meeting, and I asked the girls over there if they remembered this, and well, I guess I'm a little older than they are. All the kids would come. There was a congregation meeting. You didn't leave your kids home. You didn't have a babysitter. And we were just told to go play out in the middle of North Moodus Road. Well, we came into the congregation meeting one night and said, look at the kittens we found out there. Only these little kittens were black with white stripes down their belly. My father wanted to keep one and have it descented, and my mother said, absolutely not. And you kids go and put them back quick before Mama finds out what you've done. And thank goodness we did. But this is the family camaraderie that we had. And I wish so many times that the children today could have that freedom to explore and do the things that we could back then. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael and John and Ellen, for your reflections, your recollections. I know I have just a couple of questions for you, and then we will turn to your memories as well. And then, of course, if you had a chance to pick up a program, then Ellen will be sharing with us some excerpts from the book. Your story, Ellen, reminded me of a time last year when I was teaching our 7th graders. And because of this incredible nature around us, we could see through the conference room at the back of this hall that there was a rainbow following a storm like this one. And you know what? We put our books down and we went outside and we looked at that rainbow. And we said the blessing over a rainbow. And of all the memories of last year, that's the one the kids kept coming back to. You know, and so I think we're getting there. We're doing it, and it's wonderful. Luckily, there weren't stomps involved. So my question for the three of you is, based on your experiences growing up and creating various aspects of this community, what aspect of its legacy, of what makes us who we are, do you want to make sure makes it to the next generation? What do you see as a key component of who CBSRZ is that you want to make sure we hang on to?
For some reason, the word resilience came to mind immediately, so I thought I should just grab the mic and say it before I forgot it. We had some really trying times. There was a period that, growing up, the synagogue was just there for us. And as a child, you didn't do anything to maintain it. And having gone away to school, and then coming back years later with Doreen to settle back in Deep River, which was within the radius of her parents and my parents, so we just drew a circle and ended back up in Chester. And so we got involved in the synagogue, only because at the time, and there's a bunch of us, I can remember when we did it, a bunch of us got together and said, if we don't do something, as I guess other points of time, if we don't do something now, this thing is just going to crash. And we looked around and realized that it's up to us to deal with it. And I know my own personal involvement was, I think, 8 or 9 years as taking over finance, when the budget was probably $27,000. But I will tell you that it balanced, and then for the next 8 years, every year we had a surplus. It could be in pennies, but everything was budgeted from the ground up for exactly what we needed. And if there was extra, it didn't necessarily mean it had to get spent, and we tucked it away. And the resilience came in a couple of years later, and it's mentioned in the book, and when we had some money taken from us, pretty much everything. And again, it's in the book. The book is incredible, by the way. In its detail and its dimension from two congregations coming together. It's just, you'll see. But actually, I should probably stop, only because you just have to read the book. You just have to read the book, but you'll see the resilience of the farmers and the people who struggle to make this work, and you see it in how this building was built and how it was put together. You see it in the taking of two worlds, which you've gone from Orthodox to conservative on one side of the river, conservative to reform on this side, finding a commonality of interest, which all is the top of this building, really. It's our connection to our Judaism. This is our community, regardless of what side of the river we came from. We all found the commonality of purpose over time, over a number of years. But eventually, the resilience of two people who are a little bit different in how they observe the same commonality fused together, which is why this worked when it worked, and it's always going to work.
There are so many memories, but this morning when I decided I wanted to make sure that there was a Clapholz and a Pressman and a Samuels here, and I didn't have a local phone book, and I turned to Joanne and I said, Joanne, I need a phone book. I got to find Arlene Pressman's phone number. She said, oh, 9100. there are 3 phone numbers of the synagogue before we had a phone number. You used to be able to dial 5 digits in Chester, and you were there. Now it's 10 digits. But 5466, is that right, Jane? Sandals house. 9100, Arlene? Right? And then when the phone moved from Arlene to Rita, moved to Joanne, and 9477 at our kitchen table was the phone number of the synagogue. But there was a sense of unity amongst the people in this congregation that made it happen. And when we had one crisis, which was the embezzlement, which you read about, there was the second crisis, which Joanne reminds me of, when we didn't have the money for a new septic tank at Union Street, and we had to mortgage the building to put in a new septic tank. And I remember when Martin Nadell was the president at that time. He called us all together and said, we all have to sign personally on this mortgage because the building wasn't worth anything. But it was a sense of human beings coming together. And that's what, you're right, John, the resilience of the people in this congregation is what made it. Now I want to tell you a secret that's not in the book because it's the terms of the contract between Rodfe Zedek and Beth Shalom, of which we had a lot of problems in negotiating it. Here was the deal. The Moodus congregation had a building and a great number of empty graves and 5 secretaries. And we decided that the way to bring them into our orbit was to give the 17 remaining families of Rodfe Zedek lifetime membership in this synagogue. No dues, no obligations whatsoever. Would you believe that we had members of our congregation who said, no way, Jose. But it was a good deal, and that was in the ketubah between us.
Beautiful, thank you. Ellen, do you want to share? What do you think the next generation should know?
Well, I think the word is family, the feeling of family and of warmth. And by the way, what I didn't mention is when the synagogue on Orchard Road was built by Rodfe Zedek, that was a labor of love. That wasn't hiring, there was no money to hire people to paint the building or install things, and anybody who had some special talent. My father wired the building. Joe Pear was out there painting constantly. It was all done. And it was hard. It was hard also to see that building go because it meant so much. Now, we lived right across the street from the temple when it was built, the new temple. And it was funny because there was an obligation on Friday night. You either went to temple or you had to shut your whole lights off and look like you were at home. And my kids actually lived, I would say they lived there. And the rabbi and Rabbi Bernstein and Estelle would sleep in the temple, but they would spend the rest of Rosh Hashanah when services and Yom Kippur were not going on at our house. And this warmth. My husband Chuck is not Jewish. And we were at a Presbyterian christening of his granddaughter. And he said to me, toward the end of the services, he whispered to me, he said, they don't hug and kiss here. So watch yourself.
Thank you all. So I think it's time to turn to some of your memories. There are a few people I'd like to begin with, and then we'll have an opportunity for a few others. One of the names we hear all the time, or we read throughout the book, and that you may recall is Lillian Friend. And so Roberta Friend Hewland will be sharing just a few words. I've asked Joanne Price to also share just a couple words with us. Yes, let's just give our speakers another round of applause. For starting our gears turning with all of these wonderful stories. And then, you heard the name Clapholtz already as well, and Lisa Clapholtz and Marcy Littlefield are here to share just a couple of their memories. And it's just so special to have this opportunity to, in a way, fold the timeline and to connect across decades with these parts of our history, and thus to be able to look forward in the same way to, what are the building blocks that we can be putting in place or making sure are in place now to ensure that this incredible family, that this mishpacha that is CBSRZ is here for a long, long time. So Roberta, please come up and share some of your thoughts with us. Thank you, Rabbi. Can you all hear me? Okay. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay, good. As Rabbi Bagels said, I am Lillian and Joseph Friend's daughter. And that's my moniker at this place. Because nobody else knows me unless I say I am their daughter, and I'm proud of it. And I'm also very proud to be here because while this is not the building that was my original temple, this is the congregation that was from both towns, Moodus and Chester. My mother grew up in Moodus, my father grew up in Chester, or eventually came there and settled, and they married in 1938. So there's a long history of our family in the area. I wanted to talk a little bit about the historical aspects of my family, and if you get bored, just raise your hand and I'll change the subject. My grandparents were a part of the synagogue that Ellen so beautifully described, Rodfe Zedek, and they were Sam and Minnie Horowitz. And that was the moniker that my mother could use, so people would know who she was in Moodus. They were Orthodox. They made sure that they observed all the commandments, the traditions, kashrut, etc. My grandfather played tefillin every morning. He drank schnapps with his meals, and he also led services. I only found that out recently, so he's grown in my mind. On my father's side, Goose Hill Road in Chester was a farming community of Jewish farmers and others, but the Jewish farmers kind of stood out. And my grandparents there were Isaac and Rachel Friend. My grandfather, Isaac Friend, came to this country, I'm not sure when, long before the revolutions and those kinds of things that we talk about. And he decided he was not going to be Jewish or any other religion. He was a socialist, changed his name from Popowitz, which I think was a good idea, to Friend, because he wanted to be a friend of the community. And he did not give his children a Jewish education. So when my father met my mother, I think it was a coincidence that they fell in love and married because you had the Orthodox and the nothing coming together. And the paradox of this arrangement is that my father's aunt, Esther Jacobson, who was Esther Popowitz Jacobson, founded the first synagogue that I know of in Chester before the Romanovs. And you'll read about all this probably in the book. And they built a separate entrance in their home on Goose Hill Road. And their son, Nathan Jacobson, who I believe is not here, told me a lot of family stories, also contributed to the book, his stories of growing up Jewish in Chester. So this paradox continued, and my parents married and had 3 children. I was the oldest, Roberta, and my sisters, Eleanor and Sheila. Both of them had a love of learning and education. While my father didn't know too much about Judaism, he learned. And eventually coming to the point where when I lived in Israel, he came to visit me and was so excited and became so Zionistic at that time that it was a pleasure to watch him. And the story goes that when Rabbi Marcia Plum came to the community, my father was not a synagogue goer, and my mother invited her to dinner, and she was a very attractive woman. And somehow or other, because she must have explained to him the services will be in English because he didn't know any Hebrew, he started to come. And he eventually became a trustee
of this synagogue. So I always thought my mother was pretty smart to do that. The other thing I wanted to talk about very briefly are the rabbis that influenced our family and were mentors of our family. The first one being Rabbi Bernstein, who, with Ellen's mother, were my Sunday school teachers in Deep River. And he was a Holocaust survivor, and also I had cousins in the area, Bobby and Betty Friend, who attended, and they were confirmed in the 1960s or so in the Deep River Synagogue. And I remember the confirmation, it was a Friday night, because I guess you didn't do those things on Saturday then. And my Aunt Helen, their mother, donated 5 sidurs to the temple. And I thought that was great. I mean, that she thought of doing that, and they probably needed them desperately. The second one was Rabbi Doug Sagel. And when my dad was taken from us very suddenly, he was there. And he delivered a eulogy with love in every word, and everyone loved Rabbi Sagel. The third one was Rabbi Corey Weiss, who was very influential in my mother's life towards the end, to the point where he was able to persuade her that she did not have to fast on Yom Kippur because she had to take medications with food. And he did it by saying he was a diabetic and he had to eat. So then she was convinced. Up till then, probably till she was 80-something, she fasted every Yom Kippur. So, and the third one, he was the third one. Another thing that I remember is the parade of Torahs going from the Deep River Synagogue on Union Street to here. It was a beautiful October day today, sunny, and the whole community marched with us. So we had the churches with us. The churches, I understand, in Chester were very happy to have a synagogue in their midst. So they supported us in that way, and I don't know what other ways. So I feel that I was very fortunate to have been a part of the beginnings. My parents were really more so a part of the beginnings, and that I'm so proud to be here at the launch of the House of Peace and Justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roberta. It really is an honor to be a successor of such distinguished rabbinic presences here. And I do have to say, Rabbi Doug Sagel very much wanted to be here this morning with us, and sent me a note yesterday that unfortunately he was no longer able to make it work to be here, but he sends his love and his mazel tovs to everybody. And I told him about how much he is spoken of here with love and respect. Joanne, can I bring you the mic? Do you want to share a word or two? Or do you want to come up here, which is better for you?
So, I didn't come prepared with a whole book of stuff, but I've been making some notes and remembering some things. I don't know what all is in the book, but I will share a couple of things that I remember and were important to me. But the first thing is following up on what Ellen said and how this house, this synagogue, this community was always such a warm and welcoming community, the feeling of family and love that was always here. We had some downs and definitely ups, but it was always that warm feeling community. Before I came here, way before, back in '48, there is the story, and I don't know if it's in the book, of how this community gathered together, of how many Jewish people, I don't know, and very proudly raised money to send an ambulance to Israel in the War of '48. Jane Samuels, who's here, her parents were very instrumental in that, and her mother talked a lot about that. My first introduction to this synagogue was Michael introduced me, but shortly after that, and the synagogue introduced us, but shortly after I was introduced, we had a house in Chester, and there was a knock at the door, and there was one of our older members, Regina Waldinger. I don't know who remembers her. Yeah, there are a couple hands. A bit of a busybody, and one or two other women who I don't remember. It was Regina who was the most aggressive, who came with a welcome gift, but she presented it to me like this, pushing her way into my house to see how I lived and what was there. Yeah, the story of how we met, Michael and I, was through this synagogue. It was Harold Samuels. Michael met Harold and Rita Samuels at the old place in Deep River and became friendly. And then met Rita and Harold's daughter, Sayre. And as I said, Jane is here. Sayre's sister is here today. And Sayre was a very, very good friend of mine from USY, from youth group, and told me I had to meet this guy. Here we are. There was mention, I think, by Michael of the interview of Doug Sakel in New York. Amy and I went down and we spent a whole day interviewing candidates. And as we were leaving, walking out the door, somebody came running up to us and said, "Oh, are you leaving? Are you leaving?" "Yes." "Oh, I really wanted to meet you. We heard about the ladies from Connecticut, and we wanted to meet you." And I thought, the picture I got of the ladies from Connecticut were that we were wearing our hats and our white gloves, etc. We stayed a few more minutes and we met this candidate, but it wasn't Doug. John, you mentioned the budget of $27,000. What you didn't mention is the dues. When I first became active, back in the early 70s, our dues were, for a family, $75. We raised them all the way up to $125. And that's what we survived on. For a while. I want to mention the religious school, Adele Miller's involvement in it, and then, as many things in those days, it crashed. And it was Peggy Tunick who very much, and I know she's mentioned in the book, very much really thought that Jewish education was very important. She lived in Moodus in East Haddam. Rabbi Bernstein, at that point, wasn't interested in a religious school. She joined here in Chester, Deep River, and started a religious school. She started it with 4 children meeting in a closet. It was a little space off the bima. The kids, it was luckily carpeted, and the kids sat on the floor, and Peggy sat on some steps in there. And that was the first classroom for these very young children. Then the religious school grew and grew until we were holding 4 or 5 classes in that building, upstairs in the different corners, downstairs in the corners, and then it was John Sandberg who found this vacant office building over here on Middlesex Turnpike. Vacant, nothing in it, partitions in terrible shape, ripped carpets, and we moved in there. And out of that became a religious school that was known in the whole New Haven region as being one of the most creative. The space made the school be creative, because there were 1 or 2 rooms with closed doors. Everything else was kind of open and partitions and divided. And we grew then to 110 students. That was the maximum. Pretty good from 4. But coming back to just the warmth and the welcoming of this synagogue, there were always people at the door to greet people coming in, not only on Friday nights, but every Sunday morning for religious school, there was someone here to greet them as they came, greet them as they left. We called them the red jackets because some of us, we came in red ski parkers and we greeted everybody coming and going. And what's wonderful is that same flavor is still here today in our much larger, much more diverse, and still very welcoming community.
So I'm going to come back to Lisa and Marcy because they are all the way back, so I'm going to bring them the microphone, and then we'll have a chance for just a few other, if you have a minute or two of something to share. So I'm going to go, and then I'll come back, Marty, to you, and Jackie, I saw your hand before, and who else's hand did I see? I've tried to get to everybody. This is the Phil Donahue part of the morning. Hold on. Okay.
We're just gonna give a few little remembrances. First of all, I think we can thank Beth Shalom, who was president when my dad switched jobs and moved to Connecticut, because he was a candidate for Croft Educational Publications in New London. My parents lived in New Jersey with me. I was a little girl, very little. And so that was probably why he was hired in the first place. And I just remember as a little kid going to services Friday night. I have some remembrances of Hebrew school. My dad taught history, and Mr. Esther, I believe his name was, taught Hebrew. And I remember the bar mitzvah boys. It was Rosenthal in there, John. Who I remember them giving my dad a hard time. They were a few years older than me, and I just remember it was horrible that my poor dad had to deal with these boys. I don't know. But anyway, I remember the building in Deep River. We always had floods from the bathrooms. I remember them trying to fit people in for these corned beef dinners. We were tabled anywhere you could fit them, practically under the stairways. I remember the people coming in from Bill Hahn's, taking the seats. I remember my dad, I think, stuffing the prayer books with the little envelopes for the fundraising things. And I remember him having to get up on holidays and not quite beg for money, but he had to give a message. And he really didn't enjoy doing that, but I do remember him doing that. I remember the big discussion in our house when we got older about Hebrew school. My mother really wanted us to have a little more formal education, so the three of us ended up going to Bethel in New London. I was in 4th grade. I think Michael and Lisa started there, originally in kindergarten probably. But anyway, so I do remember that. I just think my dad would be thrilled with us, just thrilled. He was more of a conservative school though, so it would be very interesting to hear what he had to say. But I think he would be very pleased. I remember going Friday night, we would pick up Mr. Brightman, who was a major benefactor of the synagogue. We would pick up Mrs. Waldinger. And I believe there was a Tilly Fine that lived on her street. We would pick her up sometimes too. It was quite a ride on Friday night. It really was just something to remember. And I remember growing up with the Birnbaums and the Joslo kids, and it was just very sweet. And I remember Rabbi Bernstein, and he was just the sweetest man. And the funniest thing is we have some friends now locally that are very good friends with his son. So I have seen his son a couple of times, and daughter-in-law and their children. So it's kind of interesting how life revolves. Yes, so thank you.
All I can really say is
thank all of you for keeping this going, something that meant so much to my father, that he loved that little temple in Deep River and did whatever he could. Now, he always wanted to be a rabbi, but he couldn't carry a tune to save his life. But he had that passion and the knowledge of it. Imagine being 5 years old, riding with Regina Waldinger, Tilly Fine, and Mr. Brightman, who was probably 90-something years old at the time. It was always an exciting trip, but I really do remember Bill Hans pouring in. And I was young, because I don't know when that ended, but I was, and oh my God, the whole air changed when they came in the building, because it's unlike anything you see around here. But I remember the high holidays especially being the most important thing that my father had, because in the temple, because it was a full house, and I remember him reading every single name on the memorial boards. He read every single one, and I just think he would be, I know he's watching and seeing what has become of that little temple that he cared so much for, and that is a big tribute to you and to all of you for helping keeping it going. So I thank all of you. And I know my mother does too.
Thank you, Marcy and Lisa. And I know that your mother, Lorraine, wanted to be here today. She was with us for the High Holy Days, and it was wonderful to see her. So, Marlene.
I just want to, we came here, I think it was like around 1992, but I want to bring up something that's more current. I love hearing the old stories, and the warmth has followed us right along. But I think what I really want to say is a thank you, as we sit in this building, to John Sandberg, who was president at the time, and he came to Jerry and I and asked us if we would chair the building committee. And then Peggy Tunick came along, and Peggy and I and Nancy Fishback were the ones that found the land that we're on. We met at our house over the dining room table. There was Michael and George and Henry Resnikoff and David Hayes and some others that are now missing. We raised the money. We hired an architect, which actually until Saul came along, we changed direction, and Saul obviously came on and he became our architect, along with Steve, which I don't remember his last name, Steve Lloyd. But it took a while, but we used to have these meetings, and this is where this building began, which I think we all now appreciate. And George, you tell them the story about where you found the beams for the sanctuary. So there was a lot of camaraderie doing it, some discussion that was, what are we doing? But all in all, I think we have a wonderful home here and a gorgeous building. So thank you, John, for the initial action on this building.
Thank you.
I think I'm the oldest one here with the most oldest memories. I'm Jackie Greenberg Wolf. And there were the Fines and the Learners in Saybrook, the Greenbergs, Brightmans and Freeds in Essex, the Feinsteins in Chester, the Elgarts in Deep River. And I remember no Hebrew school, but Sunday school, because Shirley Lerner was a teenager and she had gone to the Hebrew school, so she taught Sunday school. And we parked our heads and hearts wherever we could find a space, which was the Deep River Town Hall. I remember being in a show, dancing with someone, and fast forward, I got married in 1953. I was come back to the temple in Deep River with my husband, and my father would be so annoyed. He says, "Look at this. They're all from Bill Hahn's, and you can't even get a decent seat, and they don't even pay to come in here." And he would, then along came Michael and Joanne, and that was the name that I heard from my mother's lips, that they were instrumental in reviving the temple. And my mother once saying after one of the holidays, "Michael, you need a new refrigerator. Here's $25 to start a refrigerator fund." But many, many memories, and I feel I'm connected with both because we had a store in Essex, Greenberg's, and it was the largest store in the whole valley. But my father used to close the store and we'd go up to Moodus and to Lebanon. And in Moodus, we would stay at Orchard Mansion and we'd go to the temple. And of course, I'm a graduate of Pratt High School and into sports. Lou Mager, Jack Axelrod, I dated them, I knew them. Herb Kabachnik was my brother's friend. Rita Palmer Samuels, her brother was my brother's good friend, and her other brother, Bud, was my friend who went into the war, and I remember writing to him every single day on a different piece of stationery, a different, even black with white ink. So I'm definitely connected with the Samuels, definitely connected here in the Valley, and I came back permanently in 1981 to stay here and am amazed at what started out so small in Deep River merged with Moodus, and my connection is with both of them. Job well done to all your congregants.
Thank you, and we're going to pass the microphone over here to Stephen Davis before we turn our attention to Ellen and the book.
Thank you, Rabbi. I really enjoyed what Ellen told us earlier when she was talking about what are the characteristics that keep us going, and hugs and kisses, I think, was the main thing. I would add determination. And I'll give you my favorite example of that, which is when it was about 3 years ago, and I was vice president on the board, getting ready to follow my illustrious predecessor, Larry Bloom, as president. And I was looking at the boards in the back, memorial boards, and I noticed at the top it said, Rodfe Zedek, founded October 4th, 1915. And so I went over to Wendy and I said, does anyone know that we have our 100th, is there anything being done about our 100th anniversary next year? And she said, no, first I've heard of it. So I began to think about that. What was the motivation? What could have brought our chicken farmer predecessors together in 1915 when the world was aflame in war, when justice was really hard to reach? And they named this congregation, Rodfe Zedek, Pursuers of Justice, in the middle of this really difficult period during the war and during, in the world. And I brought this question to the board and to the congregation, and I have to say that I think we need to remember what they did with it. And today is just one. I mean, Ellen has put together this extraordinary book, which I know you'll enjoy reading. And this wonderful turnout today is really a tribute to that. But we also have to remember, John Joslow didn't talk about it, but one of the things that the congregation did when we were thinking about this 100 is John put together an amazing film, which is called We Built This House. And there are DVDs for sale on our swag table if you like. But anyone who wants to learn about our building, you can see it there as well as in the book. So thank you to John. Sally Herzog And Paula Fetter and her team did an amazing job with all the tours that we did throughout Eastern Connecticut, looking at our history and our roots, which is really the roots, not just of our community, but the roots of Jews in America. Wonderful stuff. And then Sue Fine and her team did an extraordinary job. You'll remember from 2 years ago, we had our gala for the 100th anniversary in this room. Just a great event. And what I'm happy about is that 98 years from now, when congregants of this community come together, hopefully in this room, hopefully under this roof, maybe with better weather, they will have before them our book, our film, our memory on live stream from today, and they'll know where they came from, and they'll know that we thought about their future too, and they'll be hopefully thinking about their children and their grandchildren in this building. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So, I'm sorry, one more quick contribution from another one of our founding families, from Matt Elgart.
Hi, I'm going to give you from way back in the 40s when we came to Deep River, and it wasn't the synagogue. And we met at Harry Zach's house, and we had many books from long ago. And it was pretty difficult for me as a young child to kind of get into it. Everything was in Hebrew and long, very long. I mean, everybody in the garden going like this, for Harry, but he never stopped. But anyway, this is before they had the synagogue on Ridge Street or corner of Ridge, and Harry Brightman had given us land to build the synagogue. And not many people might know about this, but it was in Centerbrook, where Oliver's is now. And I remember as a kid, we were 8 years old or whatever, clearing land. We go there, on the weekends, and all the people. We'd be all there clearing land. And then they made the arrangement to buy the one in Deep River, which I guess is a church or the YMCA, different things. And that's where, I remember I was bar mitzvahed and confirmed there. The Rabbi Henry O. Bernstein was the rabbi who did that. I'll just tell you a quick recollection of Rabbi Bernstein, wonderful man. And he always picked me up and drove me to his lessons and back, and he had a Plymouth, which was new Plymouth, but it had one of those little visors on top, so you couldn't see the top street lights from above, and it had a little, I think people might remember, a little prism on the dash. And as a kid, I was amazed. You look into a prism to see the light overhead. But the thing that he always impressed on me, I didn't understand it until I got older. He impressed on me all the time was the 6 million Jews that had been killed. I mean, that was to him. I just couldn't, fathom it. And I couldn't fathom those numbers until I got older. But that's my recollections.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. And I hope we have more opportunities, even just as we're finishing our morning, if you want to share more of your memories with us, or make sure we have them, because this is part of who we are. So without any further ado, it is a privilege to invite up our wonderful author, and I'm sure we'll hear about the great team behind her as well, Ellen Nodelman.
I think somebody in here may have by accident taken my copy of the book, which is got all sorts of Post-its in it.
This is mine with my Post-its, but maybe it'll help.
Oh, well. Thank you, John Garfa. To begin with, and this should come as a surprise to nobody, this is really all Larry Bloom's fault. CBSRZ's 100th anniversary was coming up for the fall of 2015. So sometime in late summer of 2014, Larry called and suggested we meet at Simon's to talk about an idea that he had. I had the foggiest notion of what he had in mind, but all of a sudden, we were talking about a history of the shoal, or should I say shoals, and he proposed that I be the editor. As is so often my wont, I found myself agreeing without really thinking too carefully about what might be involved. We agreed to mull it over and talk again later on. Now, what I had in mind was basically a pamphlet, a modest overview of the development of CBSRZ from its origins in 1915 to what it is today. Pamphlet. Oh well, somehow like Topsy it grew. So Larry and I met again, and I agreed to go ahead and see what I could do. By October, I had co-opted some of my fellow bat mitzvah sisters, Linda Regano, Deb Ruddy, Sandy Herzog, plus Paula Feder, all intrigued by the history idea, all now on the adult ed committee with me, to begin ransacking the archives of the synagogue. Archives, I might add, that had just been tossed into large cardboard boxes in the shoal closet in random order. It was frustrating and fascinating, like digging for buried treasure. And treasure indeed there was within those boxes. Letters, memos, shoal publications, newspaper articles, board meeting minutes, photos, and the wonderfully handwritten minutes of Rodfe Zedek's sisterhood, which gave us a clear picture of everything that very efficient and effective organization set out to do, and then accomplished. We'd already begun filming a series of interviews with Rodfe Zedek veterans with the centennial celebration in mind. Now those interviews could be mined for the book. And as we worked together, we began to branch off into areas of specialty. Sandy digging into the history of Jewish farming in Connecticut, helping organize a bus tour, Paula taking charge of the sisterhood memorabilia, and Linda, who was the go-to person for contacting and organizing everyone for the interviews, ransacking back issues of the Megillah for any and all interesting tidbits. You could find us on just about any Monday morning in the library, the conference room, wherever there was room, digging into anything we could find. I ended up taking a lot of the papers we discovered home with me so I could peruse it all at length, and attempting to organize everything chronologically, both for my own edification and so future researchers might find it easier to figure things out. I also resorted to the researcher's tool and discovered all sorts of interesting facts that Google sent my way, including the fact that the Shoal Deep River was not originally the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, as we'd assumed, but B'nai Israel, and that there have been two competing organizations in the Deep River Chester area that merged finally into the JCC, which much later, under Bob Wolf's leadership, became Beth Shalom. Who knew? It was in those early days, late January 2015, that we sweet-talked Lynn Stiles into designing the book for us, after giving her crucial dates for a timeline she was designing for the Music and More booklets. Lynn, too, assumed that this would be a pamphlet and not too much work. I have a great deal to feel guilty about. But I think you'll agree that her design for the book is nothing short of sensational. And I'm happy to say that Lynn is here today, and I want everybody to give her a big round of applause. The 100-year interviews, which are still not quite completed, so much for our original centennial celebration deadline, were invaluable in providing information about Rodfe Zedek and life in Moodus, both in early days and up through the time of the merger. I then was able to set up other interviews and or email contact with various longtime denizens of both shoals who filled me in on their memories. And pouring through those archives added still more information as the bits and pieces of CBSRZ history slowly solidified into a coherent pattern. This book is the result of all of this. I didn't have time or opportunity to talk with everyone, my most abiding regret. And I'm sincerely grateful for all the help that I received from so many people. This account of our community is truly a community effort. Now I thought I'd read you a few passages. And I thought I'd start with the building of the original show, which you can see on the table over there. Of course, there are pictures of it in the book as well. But the little shoal that's, I think, the second, the second or first, I can't quite see from here, but it's over there on there. Building a new synagogue in those days was a much simpler process. Members of Rodfe Zedek brought shingles and lumber in the rough from nearby sawmills and hauled most of the lumber to the site themselves. They hired 2 local carpenters, Albert Alger and Arthur Williams, to erect the building. Its design copied from the nearby Colchester Synagogue. It resembled nothing more exotic than the traditional New England house. It cost $4,000 and was paid for in full within the year. It wasn't fancy. It had no basement, resting instead on stone piers. It had no heating since there was no furnace, making it challenging in the cold New England winter. So before long, money had to be raised for a stone foundation and for a furnace to keep the winter at bay. Once again, the familiar stories, moments of triumph quickly succeeded by moments of daunting challenge. But the congregation proved, and it's consistently proved ever since, to be resilient, that word, and both willing and able to take these challenges on and overcome them. Meanwhile, across the river in Chester, Deep River, and Essex and Saybrook, a small Jewish community was growing as well. Some of its members farmers, some small businessmen or young professionals. This was a more dispersed community than the one in Moodus, and the Connecticut River proved a formidable barrier to joining the Moodus congregation for residents living so many miles away on the other side of the river. As is customary in so many areas where Jews were scattered in small numbers, most of these newcomers observed customs and holidays in their own homes, getting together on occasion with a few others who might live nearby. Then in the 1930s, a chicken farmer named Isaac Jacobson rallied some of his acquaintances to come and worship in his house on Goose Hill Road in Chester. And with this, we see the birth of what was first B'nai Israel, emerging later with another fledgling Jewish group to become the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, and ultimately turning into Congregation Beth Shalom. Later in the decade, the group moved to another house in Chester, this time Isidore Romanoff's house on Spring Hill Road. Isidore Romanoff wasn't fooling around. He procured a Torah, which legend tells us was kept in the top of his desk, perhaps a roll-top desk perfectly suited for such a chore, and brought together friends and neighbors for holidays, the occasional Shabbat, and important lifetime celebrations. Among the group that gathered regularly at the Romanoffs were Joe and Lillian Friend, who lived on and worked a chicken farm named Humpty Dumpty Farm on Goose Hill Road in Chester. Married in 1938, Friends had other farming neighbors, Jewish farming neighbors, the Feldmans, the Glazers, and of course the Jacobsons. Some connections with each other preceded their banding together in Connecticut. The Glazers and Friends knew each other in New York before either family had moved to the country to take up farming, and the Jacobsons were relatives of the Friends. A perfect example of the way mishpacha, or family, worked to bring people out of the city to join together in this new enterprise in the country. A little bit about the Rodfe Zedek show, the first one. The synagogue itself was small, big enough for services, but not for much else. And on the high holidays, it was jammed. With its wooden construction and no carpeting, noise emanated from the old women's section in the balcony before Rodfe Zedek moved to a conservative model of joint seating for men and women. Joanne Rudolph and Nancy Graham remember when they were still small enough to sit with their fathers downstairs, hearing every footstep each woman took above them. On Yom Kippur, when every family was in attendance for the afternoon service and Yizkor approached, the children were taken out of the service by one of the mothers, but there was no other room in the building for them. So they went outside to the tiny space between the front of the synagogue and the road and played there, jumping on the fallen leaves that littered the space. They still remember the autumnal smell of those occasions, yesterday's fond memories, today's horrified safety concerns. Yes, and you can see the picture of the house here, and you can see where the road is, and literally, there was no road there. But Ellen went out there and found little baby skunks in the middle of the road. I guess there wasn't much traffic in those days.
A little bit about the buying of the Union Street shoal. There's originally, as was said, the plans had been to build on the property, and there had been fundraising at Oliver's, and there had been fundraising done, but there just wasn't enough funds, so they had to go to Plan B, which was to buy an existing building. And so they thought they bought the Union Street building and built and got it ready a little later than they had hoped to. And 5 nights later, after the opening, the JCC celebrated its first Rosh Hashanah in the new building on Union Street. It was a very special night. Despite bare-bones status, the building was impressively adorned, that's a quote, and the service was well attended with 57 people in attendance and well led by the religious committee. The rest of the high holidays went equally well, with almost as many, 56 people there on Rosh Hashanah morning. The first aliyah in the new building was given to Harry Zack, who also delivered the very first sermon of that day. 23 children attended a children's service conducted by Max Fine and Norman Sibben, a service that, quote, proved very stimulating to the children, some of whom saw the sacred symbols of Jewish faith for the first time, end quote. The second day's sermon was delivered by Harold Samuels to the 56 people there. And Kol Nidre and Yom Kippur were equally successful, with a sermon by Norman Sibben on Yom Kippur, and tribute given to the hard and impressive work done by the religious committee. All those years of leading services in each other's homes had more than prepared them for their own building. The JCC was off to a great start. A little bit about the organization. Challenges to the still new and self-defining congregation extended far beyond the existence of a rabbinical position. The organization was very small, expanded and contracted unexpectedly over the next decade or two. The original inner core of the group, including the Harrys, that's Harry Zack and Harry Brightman, the Franks, Joe and Lillian, Ben Brudinski, Regina Waldinger, and the Samuels, Harold and Rita, were now joined by the Clapholtzes, Lowell and Lorraine, the Pressmans, Arlene and Alan, and the Prices, Michael and Joanne. Then there was Bill Hahn, a resort owner from Westbrook, whose fundraising efforts helped keep things afloat, plus Harvey Redak, who had come over to the shoal from his summer houseboat in Essex for a casual Shabbat visit and ended up staying. Finances, Michael Price remembered, were somewhat ad hoc matter. The JCC lived a hand-to-mouth existence without any real financial structure. People who cared gave. The executive board wrestled with the question of how to meet growing financial need, and eventually added first more than just nominal dues, then tickets for high holidays. Joe Friend's daughter, Roberta, remembers how insistent her father had been that all members should receive free tickets for the high holiday service. His efforts met success. The tickets would be free to dues-paying members and available only at a small cost to others. But even that small cost was something of a shock to some congregants. Martin Adele captured the spirit of these days in his description of the shoal that he joined in the 1970s. When we arrived in Chester in 1970 via California and Deep River, we met Rita and Harold Samuels and Judy and David Joslow, leading us to join the Jewish Community Center of Lower Middlesex County. The quaintness of the shoal was cute, but often inconvenient. The basement flooded after any heavy rain. This was eventually fixed after David Joslow attached a long diverting drainage pipe to the rain gutters. The bathrooms worked part-time. The metal chairs and hand-me-down wooden benches were guaranteed to keep you awake during services. Part of the seats were replaced by the Joslows, who bought huge overstuffed seating. Most of the congregation was overjoyed, but a minority complained the chairs were too comfortable and people tended to fall asleep. What's a shoal without controversy? Beth Shalom had eventually remained a conservative synagogue for a while, but hired a Reformed rabbi, John Neiman, who agreed to conduct traditional services. And it was interesting. Beth Shalom was officially conservative, but had withdrawn his membership in the United Synagogues of America during the financial crunch of the 1970s, feeling that the dues paid to that organization would be better put elsewhere. It had never intended to go with a Reformed rabbi, but John Neiman proved a good fit since his preferences were traditional. In fact, the only real disagreement Beth Shalom had with Rabbi Neiman was when it proved to be more liberal than he overgranted the request to bury the ashes of a congregant who wanted to be cremated and buried in the cemetery. Rabbi Neiman stuck to tradition and opposed it. The congregation overruled him. But he did take a progressive stance on the issue of mixed marriages. In the mid-1970s, Rabbi Zavotinsky, who was running a religious school at the time, had opposed allowing a child of a mixed marriage to become bar mitzvah, despite the fact that he had attended religious school at the JCC and prepared for his bar mitzvah there. Here too, the congregation overruled the conservatism of that rabbi and allowed the bar mitzvah ceremony to proceed without the rabbis having to participate. In contrast, Rabbi Neiman willingly reached out to people in the larger community in mixed marriages. By the 1980s, the issue of mixed marriages and its implication for synagogue membership was a matter of increasing concern, and Rabbi Neiman encouraged Beth Shalom to follow its inclusive instincts and include such families. There's two more little passages. Scott Doug Siegel, who I believe the first year Doug came on as rabbi, he was actually still hired as a part-time rabbi. Doug Siegel came on, like his predecessor, as a part-time rabbi who was soon doing the work not just of a full-time, but beyond full-time rabbi. By now, the congregation had learned its lesson and soon formalized the relationship, bringing Beth Shalom's first-time full-time rabbi on board. The Siegel years, 1990 to 1999, are legendary. Poised for growth after Rabbi Plum's contributions, the synagogue under Rabbi Doug's leadership began to fly. The idea of expanding its membership through a merger with Rodfe Zedek and Moodus, which still faced the double whammy of new expenses brought on by the new building and a fall in membership because of declining Jewish demographics on the eastern side of the river, had been brought up in 1989, even before Rabbi Doug's arrival. Both congregations were interested, but each felt constrained by certain crucial facts: the long and rich history of the Moodus shoal and its new building, which was at once its pride and joy and its costly burden; the spread-out nature of the Deep River congregation, whose members resided everywhere from the western bank of the river to much more far-flung shoreline communities, and even as far as Hartford. To Beth Shalom, moving to Moodus made no sense. And to Rodfe Zedek, the thought of losing their home, and by extension their history, was too painful. Despite interest in exploring all possibilities, the idea of the merger was tabled for the time being. I think that's what you were talking about, the very first sentence there. And then, last, at the end, towards the end of the book, where I talked a little about this, a little about that, and call it potpourri or mishigatz. Talk about learning. Clearly, learning for everyone, a central piece of Jewish identity and practice, is alive and well at CBSRZ. The strong religious skill of today's Kibbutz, the many venues for lifetime learning, from lunch and learn with a rabbi to the visiting scholar programs and prayer workshops and holy scrollers, there's no dearth of opportunity to grow as an individual, as an adult, as a Jew. Scrollers is the perfect example. The Saturday morning Torah study program, Holy Scrollers, originally named by Rabbi Siegel, has become firmly entrenched and attracts not just CBSRZ members, but participants from very different religious backgrounds who come to learn beside everyone else. Scroller has its regular and its occasional participants. Whoever comes on any given Shabbat, the group is always eclectic, skeptical, freewheeling, argumentative in a cordial, non-confrontational way, and thoughtful. Newcomers have described themselves as at first awed by the intellectual imminence of the assorted members, but then often compelled to chime in despite themselves, carried away by the openness of the discussion and the spirit of inquiry that directs it. It is a perfect introduction to the variety and richness of the CBSRZ experience. That CBSRZ experience consists of so many different pieces. There is the piece that is the regular Shabbat service experience, warm, welcoming, unafraid of addressing issues that may or may not divide us, and the expectation that addressing them will help us unite despite our differences. There is the piece of the congregation coming together in times of trouble, whether small and personal or large and national. When word got out of the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995, Larry Bloom tells us it, quote, brought a spontaneous crowd to the Deep River Shore. No one knew what to do or to say, but that night candles were lit, and we all felt close to our brothers and sisters far away. More than that, it showed the ability of community to comfort in a time of international grief. When Superstorm Sandy hit, dozens of members of the community rallied around those who were in danger of flooding and in need of evacuating their houses and offered up their own homes as shelter from the storm. Similar overtures have been made every time the power has gone off, especially in the midst of winter, whenever CBSRZ congregants have been in need of help. And there is a piece of taking up causes and advocating for those who cannot advocate effectively for themselves, something that the congregation, with its dedicated social action committee at the helm, takes seriously. In times of personal difficulty and loss, not only the rabbi and the Chesed committee get involved, but others in the community rally around, visiting, comforting, caring for those who need the help in ways both large and small. Diverse as it may be, CBSRZ is an extended family. It also extends its hand to the larger community, working to ensure equitable and just conditions for everyone, not just for its own members. It has participated in initiatives to provide food and clothing and housing for those who need it, as well as intellectual and emotional support and stimulation to disadvantaged children and books for female inmates in Connecticut prisons. Through its social action committee programs, the congregation has advocated for universal health care, improved care and access to services for the mentally ill, and equal education for all. It strives to counter discrimination and ensure equal opportunities everywhere, and to further the pursuit of peace at home and overseas in our own country, in Israel, and in the world at large. These are just some of the issues the community has made its own, that it seeks to continue in its pursuit of peace and justice as it forges ahead in its centennial year and beyond. I'd like to ask Rick Horning to come up, because I hope that all of you who have a copy of the book have had a chance to look at the epilogue, which Rick wrote for this. And it's so beautiful, I've asked him to read it.
I just stand here on the shoulders of so many and in profound, profound gratitude. My family has done nothing but reap the benefits of all the generosity, all the kindness, all the compassion, all the beauty, and all the creativity that has gone into making these congregations. And there are just three names that I would just like to mention who are just named, are just people, many, but who I would like to just mention who have a special role. Harriet Fellows, Donna Moran, and John DiNicola reminds us that from one generation to another. 18 irregular quatrains where wind and spirit whistle. On the Leesville Road we stand as judges and teachers, accountants and doctors, even a banker where farmers and liverymen once mortgage a past, many times redeemed. As February's light snow flutters over 5 feet that have fallen since January's third week, on the Leesville Road we stand, graveside to grieve and begin again, a family bearing mother and wife. On the Leesville Road we stand, hunched overlooking the salmon run, where wind and spirit whistle, strange noises magnified and sanctified. We stand on the Leesville Road, like Nahantics, honoring ancestors beneath oak and maple groves. We stand on the Leesville Road. Knowing who is ours and who is not, exiles from Silesia and Pomerania, our ancestors are farmers and liverymen. In Moodus they pray, men separated from women, reading right to left on the Leesville Road. We stand, pursuers of justice, the name of their assembly, a description of our journey to this New England town, east of the river, where millwrights and shipbuilders, whalers and slavers still whisper in shadows cast on the Leesville Road. We stand. Burying wife and grandmother, chosen to listen and remember the laugh of Sarah, the song of Miriam, the voice of Moses, the call of Isaiah, the parable of Jonah. Each summoned graveside to grieve on the Leesville Road stands a cemetery, the remnants of a congregation founded by farmers and liverymen, exiles and fugitives who brought the Psalms of David and Korah to Moodus, this place of strange noises. We pray in Hebrew, we learn English, we stand on the Leesville Road, patching Yiddish right to left, starboard to port, as schooners and steamers, ferries and rowboats crisscross the salmon run. A mother, a wife, rests where currents continue to confound captains and Puritans who came to this New England outcrop, seeking a new Jerusalem, a Zion restored. On the Leesville Road, we are momentarily quiet, standing as pursuers of justice, knowing our ancestors' arrival on the Leesville Road will bring us a safe home in exile without bringing us closer to Mount Moriah. On the Leesville Road, we stand as judges and teachers, remnants of a congregation founded by farmers and liverymen. We bury our dead as men and women. Together we pray, where strange noises once delighted and mystified Nihantics who whisper through maples and oaks, standing over the Leesville Road where our ancestors lie breathing. Psalms of David, Korah, interwind and spirit, magnified and sanctified is our task. To review our commitment, we stand on the Leesville Road, listening to rabbis who no longer separate men from women and read left to right and right to left. On the Leesville Road, we stand graveside in February's light snow, a congregation of remnants who grieve and begin again where 5 feet have fallen since January's third week. We stand on the Leesville Road to remember the laugh of Sarah, the dance of Miriam, the voice of Moses, the call of Isaiah, the parable of Jonah, as strange noises whistle in spirit and wind between oaks and maples. We stand with farmers and liverymen, mothers and wives, exiles who rest on the Leesville Road. We pursue justice and seek a house of peace.
Thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to join us this morning. Ellen will be going and sitting at a table right over here if you'd like her to sign your book or books. And stay tuned for the continuation of this second century of CBSRZ Life. Thank you all.
I grew up, that's where